Good evening and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, May the 3rd. I'm Councillor Chad Rintoul, chairing Committee of the Whole this evening, and joining me in chambers, Mayor McNeil-Smith and Councillor Garnett. Also joining us by Zoom, Councillor Duncan, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Fowlett, and Councillor Wainwright. Good evening to you, and thank you to staff who are joining us this evening as well. Mr. Humble, Mr. Hissick, Ms. Nelson, and Mr. Restel is on Zoom, and thanks to Mr. Maxwell for helping us on the IT side this evening. I'll call the meeting to order, and if I may, just a couple of brief announcements before we get started. First off, for those of you joining us who may not regularly join council meetings this evening, and or committee meetings, I should suggest, this evening, Committee of the Whole, we have a set agenda and we're discussing items in relation to town finance and the 2020 financial statements. If you have an interest, and I hope you do, in providing comment and following debate on the development proposal at the Victoria Airport Authority, please join us on May the 10th for our council meeting when we'll be deliberating on that item. And I would encourage you to, in advance of that time, submit any comments you have to the town as well as the Airport Authority. This is an Airport Authority development, and your comments may be received to the email address admin@sydney.ca, as well as the Airport Authority's dedicated email address for the project, which is yorkproject@victoriaairport.com. I'll also note that at our meeting on April the 26th, there was a portion of the meeting that cut out during the live stream broadcasting, and so we apologize for that. It was a technical problem with the decoder, which has been replaced, and would encourage you to visit either the town's website or the Victoria Airport Authority's website for further information on that project. With that, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we're meeting this evening on the traditional territory of the Saanich people, and I will look to have an approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item of business is the approval of minutes, and we had minutes from Committee of the Whole meeting on March the 15th. I'll ask if there were any comments or clarifications to be made to those minutes.
Move adoption.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a mover and a seconder. Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. We have no presentations this evening. There are no development applications. The next item is staff reports, and I may have failed to acknowledge Mr. Restel is joining us as well from staff. So thank you, Mr. Restel and Mr. Hissick. The report this evening is with respect to the 2020 financial statements, and so I'll turn to staff for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to introduce the report, and Mr. Restel is here to answer any detailed questions. I am as well. So the purpose of the report is to obtain Council's acceptance of the financial statements for the year ended December 31, 2020. The recommendation from this committee will go to Council next Monday for official acceptance, and then the audit may be concluded. There is a detailed report included on the agenda, but I'll just highlight a few key points. So the annual financial statements are composed of two primary statements: the Statement of Financial Position, which is page 4 of the attachment, and the Statement of Operations and Accumulated Surplus, which is the following page, page 5. First of all, the Statement of Financial Position. It outlines the town's financial health by providing a snapshot of the total assets, both financial and non-financial, liabilities, and accumulated surplus as at the end of the previous year. And as you likely know, our fiscal year is equivalent to the calendar year, which is different from senior governments who tend to end on March 31st. Financial assets on this statement represent amounts that can be used to satisfy liabilities and to provide future services. Liabilities, on the other hand, represent cash and services owing by the town to third parties. There is a fairly large increase in accounts payable in our statements at the end of last year, relating mostly to the timing of the remittance of school taxes, which was a provincial COVID relief measure. So normally those would have been paid earlier in the year, but we're showing $2.6 million payable because of that one item. The town's largest liability is its debt, which totals $10.5 million. And it's important to note that any debt held by the town must be for capital purposes only and not to fund operating deficits. Net financial assets is the largest number on the statement. Net financial assets represents the difference between financial assets and our liabilities. A net financial asset position indicates we have more financial assets than we have future obligations. And that's a very favorable indication of the town's ability to satisfy our liabilities and to undertake future spending. It's non-financial assets, that's the largest number, and that's because it's made up almost entirely of tangible capital assets, which represents the town's past investment in assets that are held for provision of future services. The surplus from operations now stands at $4.26 million, and that essentially represents our accumulated operating surplus from all of our years of operation, combining the water, general, and sewer funds. On the statement of operations and accumulated surplus, you will see what looks like a very healthy annual surplus. But it's important to acknowledge that much of the money that we collect as tax revenue is earmarked for capital asset additions, for transferring to our reserves for future use, or for repayment of debt. None of those regular and legitimate uses of funds qualifies as expenses for purposes of financial reporting. Therefore, they're not reflected in the calculation of the annual surplus, which may, as a result, appear to be overestimated. So while it looks like we had a surplus of nearly $4 million last year, that's not a true indication of what our operating results were, because most of that was invested in capital assets. A lot of it was transferred to reserves, and our actual surplus from operations was a loss of $845,000. So the surplus or deficit from operations in any given year represents the true increase or decrease in the town's discretionary financing capacity. So in most years we generate a small surplus from operations, but 2020 was a little bit unusual. The general operating fund realized a small deficit of about $48,000, whereas the water and sewer utilities realized deficits of over $100,000 each, respectively. On the utilities side, both of those deficits were expected, but they were a little better than anticipated. On the expenditure side, on the expense side of the statement, the largest changes were $706,000 greater than the previous year in protective services, and that's largely due to the RCMP contract costs, as well as a couple of accruals for amounts due for past service, such as retroactive wages and earned retirement benefits. In addition, there was $326,000 of emergency operations expenses, which was related to COVID, and that made up part of that $706,000 increase. However, with that latter amount, there are offsetting revenues shown in the top portion of the statement. And as Council is aware by now, there are significant differences in the way the town reports its results in the financial statements versus the way we present the quarterly and year-end variance reports. The financial statements are based on national financial accounting and reporting standards, whereas the quarterly reports focus entirely on variances from the approved budget. So it's really the latter method, the variance reporting, that tends to be more relevant for internal local use. The financial statements are prepared mostly for external use, mostly to satisfy statutory reporting obligations. We expect the year-end variance report to go before council at the end of May, and that will be a supplement to the financial statements that you're considering now. So overall, the town experienced smaller than expected use of surplus in general operating due to the use of COVID restart funds, and smaller than anticipated deficits in both water and sewer. So the town did better than expected last year thanks to the Canada-BC Safe Restart Grant, which allowed us to just about break even in general operating, while also setting aside a large amount of funding to permit phasing back to full revenue status following last year's tax reduction. With that, I open it up to questions of council.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik, and I'll turn to committee members for questions of the report. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. Thank you for the report and the overview. I'm wondering, first of all, about interest rates, noting that with lower interest rates, it looks like our revenue from investments was, it seemed to be quite a bit lower from last year. And just wondering, is that something that, if interest rates remain low, is that something that will impact us in any significant way, or not?
Okay, I can take that one. Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. So you were talking about the actual returns or the year-ending balance of our investments?
I just wrote down it, let's see, in 2019 it was 413,000, and then in 222.92. So I think that was, I can't remember where I got that from, but yeah. I presumed it was amounts earned from investments, I think.
Yeah, our investment year-ending balance of investments were almost similar, exactly similar between 2019 and 2020. Okay. We were fortunate that a lot of the investments that we had during 2020 were carryovers from 2019 when interest rates were actually better than they are today. So we have experienced, when we're investing new money, lower interest rates. And in the budget for 2021, we have reflected that we are expecting to earn less interest this year because of those lower interest rates.
Right. Okay, thanks. And just a couple more, if I may. If you could just remind me about the affordable housing reserve that we have 513,000, and did that? I recall that we decided to put that into another reserve. Was that just the amenities reserve? Is that where that sits now? That 513,000?
Yes, we did consolidate those reserves at the beginning of this year.
Okay, good. Yeah. Thanks.
They're all showing under the amenities reserve now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then just one other question. In regards to, I guess, depreciation and then the reserve funds for different capital assets. So in calculating how much we put into the reserve, is that based on the depreciation, or is it some other calculation or formula that we use for those things?
Sorry, are you speaking in regards to the budgeted transfers to reserves that we make each year, or the interest that is allocated to the reserves each year?
The amounts that go into the reserve. So the calculation that we we use to put into reserve funds for different items.
I can
So
take
is that-
this one,
Is that
Mr.
related
Risto.
to the depreciation, or is it just some other formula that we use to determine how much should go into each reserve for replacement of capital assets?
Councillor, the amount we budget for transfer to reserves is not based on depreciation,
Okay.
because depreciation is an expensing of past costs, and today's and future costs tend to be much higher. So when setting budgets for how much we're setting aside into reserves each year, it's based on an analysis of our needs, and in some cases we know we're deficient, and we'll be looking to ramp up those transfers.
Right, okay. Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to colleagues to see if there are any other questions for Mr. Estelle or Mr. Hissick. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Thank you for the report and the presentation. And that is, knowing that the council approved a 0% tax increase for residents in 2020 and a 10% reduction in taxes for commercial businesses, and then the province through the school tax provided an even more significant reduction in taxes for commercial businesses. Was there a decrease? Was it noticeable that there was less tax collected because of COVID, or a delay in taxes collected because of COVID?
Through the chair to the mayor, the taxes that we collected in 2020 were almost exactly the same collection rates as they were in 2019.
Thank you. And I would say thank you to our residents and commercial businesses for being able to pay their 2020 taxes. It certainly helps manage the finances at the town, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor McNeil-Smith. And before I do a last call for questions, just a comment and perhaps an opportunity for staff to comment further along the same lines as the mayor's query. I note on page 33 of the package, and it's page 17 of the financial statements, where it identifies net taxes available for municipal purposes. It's an interesting breakout just to show in terms of what's collected, how much actually goes to other levels of government or other authorities. And specifically on that line, it does break out the school authorities as a separate line. And I guess my question would be, we note again in 2019 that it was higher at 6.8 million and lower in 2020 at almost 5.8 million. We know that there was a school tax holiday that the province requested. That obviously changes this year, and if I could, Mr. Hissick or Mr. Estelle, give you the opportunity to comment on that change as it will relate, as the mayor noted, to commercial property owners.
I can take that one, Mr. Chair. Yes, there was a large one-time reduction in provincial school taxes in 2020 as a COVID relief measure. For the current year, provincial school taxes have been reinstated to their previous level, so commercial taxpayers will see their overall tax bill going up to near the level of the 2019 average for a commercial property. So it was a one-time break, and hopefully it helped, and now it's back to normal in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. And so at this point, I'll last call to my colleagues. Any questions from committee members for staff? Seeing none, there is a recommendation with the report. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I will move the recommendation that council accept the town's financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Mr. Hissick, our Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. Estelle, our Manager of Finance, for the preparation of the financial statements. It's a lot of work. And for the detailed notes that accompany the statements. That certainly makes it easier for council the clarity that it provides, and I think also for members of the public who take an interest, it provides great clarity. And I would like to, seeing the strong financial health that these statements present, I want to thank not only Finance Department staff, but employees throughout the organization for contributing to the strong financial health of the organization. And I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll turn to colleagues. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Unanimous. That is the last item on our agenda. Thank you for joining us this evening, colleagues, members of the public and staff. I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? Thank you. We're adjourned.